All right, how is everyone doing today? Welcome to my channel. We do educational videos that are focused on delving into great theories of everything, taking deep dives into magnum opuses and tour de forces and masterpieces and grand unified theories, earth-shattering discoveries, and they typically are on the obscure side, possibly on the esoteric side. The works might be a little bit daunting, and so I try to empathize. I do empathize because I had to go through these texts at for the first time, and sometimes it's pretty hard to kind of penetrate and to make headway. When you've got a 800-page book and you're reading it at 1 page an hour, so it can be a little bit disconcerting, especially if you're still not understanding it. So I try to, kind of guide you or hold your hand a little bit, inject maybe a little bit of background information that I think you might not have, or whatever the case. I could be totally wrong, and not even, the works that I do kind of read are mainly because I'm not, don't have the kind of expertise in the subject to really condense it for you. There's a few things that I've kind of tried to condense for you, but then there's other works that I just kind of read verbatim with a little bit of editorial commentary. But today is our 208th video that we've done under the rubric of the Reciprocal Church. And the Reciprocal Church is building resources, putting them together in a syncretic manner in order to serve as a foundation for spiritual practice. It's a shout out to Dewey B. Larson and his reciprocal system of theory that kind of serves as a bridge between science and so-called religion, or at least, science and deity. And we feel like it's necessary to, stockpile a lot of weapons of mass creation and spiritual resources, because the ones that are in the norms today, our 3 Western religions, are all teetering on the brink of disaster as soon as we figure out that all 3 of them are frauds. They're all part of a Roman psychological operation. The Caesars, starting with the Emperor Tiberius in the 30s AD, put together a committee for a new Roman religion, which included Seneca the Younger, and also Lucius Piso and his brother Gaius. And they worked on kind of a pilot script that kind of put it together like a play, I believe. And they took them a while, I guess, by the time they got it together. Nero was the emperor, and Nero wasn't up for it because he had a Jewish wife, and the original new Jewish or new Roman religion was basically targeted at the Jews. The Romans had been fighting the Jews for well over a century in one little skirmish or battle or revolt or insurrection after another. And they felt like a good solution would be to come up with a Jewish Prince of Peace, and one who believed in turning the other cheek and rendering under Caesar what is Caesar's, especially if all you have to do is believe in him and you will be saved. So then they threw in some stuff like virgin birth and resurrection of the body for good measure, and they wrote it up as what was called Ur Marcus, and that was probably what we know today as Q, which was kind of like the original Mark, but then eventually Mark, Luke, and Matthew were all kind of used Q as a source material. And they presented to Nero. He was not up for it. And then they plotted to assassinate Nero. And he found out about that, and he assassinated that, or he executed all of them. I believe one of them got away with it. One of the Pisos got away, and he executed Seneca, who had been his tutor, I believe, and he executed Lucius Piso, or no, Gaius Piso. And Lucius' son came to kind of redeem, and he wrote up the Gospels from Ur Marcus. He wrote starting with the book of Matthew, or the book of Mark, and then the book of Matthew, and then the book of Luke, and then these things all kind of occurred after Emperor Vespasian was installed in 69 AD. Nero was assassinated in 68 AD, and then there were 3 consecutive emperors that all lasted for just a couple months, and Galba, Otho, and Vitellius. And then we get to Vespasian, and so the Pisos were very much kind of behind the scenes actors. They were what is known as the Little Caesars. So they were Caesars, but they kind of had to wait their turn until the Julio-Claudian Caesars kind of ran their course, which the last one of those, I believe, was Nero. And then when Vespasian came in, he took over from 69 to 79, and his son Titus from 79 to 81, and they kind of were co-emperored in the background by this guy Arius Calpurnius Piso, who was the guy who was writing the Gospels. He also used a number of different aliases and a number of different pseudonyms for his writing, but probably the main one was Josephus. He wrote as Josephus, who is not only the only first century author, secular author, to mention Jesus by name, but he is also the person who wrote the Wars of the Jews, about the Jewish war from 66 to 73 AD. And he claims that he was a Jew who actually was one of the generals in that battle for the Jews, but then was captured by Vespasian, and at that point he defected to the Romans. He said that God is now on the side of the Romans. I can feel it. And he said, I can also feel that you, Vespasian, will one day become emperor, because he was just the general at that time. And then, so when he became emperor, he pardoned Josephus from his, POW position, and brought him as the court historian to Rome, and adopted him as part of his family, the Flavian dynasty of Caesars. And then Josephus wrote Wars of the Jews. And if you read Wars of the Jews in unison with the Gospels, and probably even the rest of the New Testament, you will find that they were written by the same author, because they kind of work off each other. One parodies the other. One brings up a random element, and that element is corresponded to in the other. Um, and there are literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of parallels. We're going to go over the book of Luke and the work of Michael Menescot's coming up, where he graphs out the correspondences between the book of Luke and the Wars of the Jews, and he charts them by chapter and verse in Luke and paragraph number in Wars of the Jews, and he plots all the points of parallels. And you can see that the Arius Piso, Titus, and Vespasian signed their name to the book of Luke. And Josephus gives away the game in other places as well. In his later writings called Jewish Antiquities, he also puts it in code that he wrote the Gospels along with his wife Bernice, who was Jewish from the Herod family, and also who are like the puppet rulers of Judea, who claim to have Idumean origin, but they were descended from the Hasmoneans or the Maccabees, and they represented the Sadducees as opposed to the Pharisees. The Sadducees were much more conservative, orthodox, or whatever, and the Pharisees were much more, I would say secular, but maybe just humanistic. And then also Tiberius Alexander, who was another Jew from Alexandria, who, because Piso is, he's an Italian, a Roman. So he doesn't know his Jewish history. So he had to have gotten a boost from somebody. So his wife, as well as Tiberius Alexander and any of the other Herod family that had fled to Rome with the onset of the siege of Jerusalem in like 68 AD by Vespasian and Titus, his son. So right now we've kind of gone a little farther afield from that, because we were reading this booklet that is called The True Authorship of the New Testament, where this is laid out by Abelard Ruchlin, who kind of pieced all this together by reading every single thing that was written in the first century in their original languages, Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek, or Latin. He reads all of them. And he reads, in particular, a lot of the letters that they write to each other, all of these royals. So they were talking about Seneca, and we're talking about Pliny the Younger, who was also an in-law or the foster brother of Arius Piso. Also, Suetonius, who was also a family member, Tacitus, who are also early 2nd century people who also mentioned, made allusions to Jesus. And that's because they were in on the game. They were trying to historicize Jesus. And that's why they backdated it also. Another reason, even though it was written in the 70s, it was set in the 30s, early 30s. And the prophecies that Jesus makes in the New Testament are fulfilled by Titus in the Wars of the Jews. And so Titus is the second coming of Jesus. As if you read the Bible literally, the things that he prophesies are fulfilled literally in the history book of Josephus by Titus. And that's kind of why many Christian sects have had Josephus's Wars of the Jews as part of their Bible. And even today, the preterist sect still uses Josephus as part of their Bible. But most people got rid of Josephus once they realized that, well, it does make Jesus a prophet, but it makes Titus the God. Jesus is prophesying the existence of Titus. So they realized that that was kind of like a double bind. So anyway, Reuchlin, if that's how you pronounce his name, Reuchlin, and he wrote this way back in 1979. Many people throughout history have known this, but they haven't been able to like overtly say it, because of the tight censorship and the, things about burning you at the stake and stuff like that. So they would kind of put it in veiled language. You can see the works of William Shakespeare or Edgar Allan Poe, Leo Tolstoy, Mary Shelley, and even Bertrand Russell, dozens and dozens of others. It's Lewis Carroll, C.S. Lewis, and but as far as academics are concerned, a few in the late 19th, early 20th century understood this as well. But Reuchlin is the first person to really like overtly address a book about it. It's really just a booklet called The True Authorship of the New Testament. But we're looking at an addendum to this book, which goes into the true authorship of the Quran. And he says the Quran was also written by the family of the Pisos. And it was written for much the same reasons, but just 600 years later, or 580 years later, whatever. They use 10 characters from the Bible, from the New Testament, including Jesus, Mary, John the Baptist, Zacharias, his father. And he's going to tell us right here about the other 6. So we commence an explanation of the additional 6 characters with the important Satan. Piso had created him in the Gospels, and he was later inserted prominently in the Quran. Now remember, Satan does really not occur in the Old Testament. Occurs just like a handful of times, but always it's just kind of like it just means an obstacle or a challenge, something, that's in the way. It's not like the arch rival of evil that it becomes once Hollywood gets their hands on him. Even Satan in the New Testament is a far cry from, I think, the image that most Christians have of Satan now. And probably most Satanists also. They have a much more evil idea of Satan than is present in any of the ancient scriptures. You could check out, there's a book, I don't remember the author, it's called The Birth of Satan, and it goes into a lot of that. He says that a major factor in Satan was Dante's Inferno, 9 layers of hell or whatever it is, and also John Milton's Paradise Lost. Those had a lot to do with the imagination of Satan and hell. But Satan, Piso, what Piso does is he basically gives God an exorcism, going from the Old Testament to the New Testament. He takes out Jesus but he also takes out Satan from like the monotheistic God of the late Old Testament, because the early Old Testament God is definitely polytheistic. There's all these competitors to God, Ashtaroth and Moloch and so on. They're like his competitor gods. But eventually, once they had the exile and the Jews, and they moved to Persia and to Babylon, that's where they got the idea of monotheism, and they put it into the New Testament, or the Old Testament, which was basically being compiled up there in Babylon. And when they came back in the 6th century BC, they from that time until the New Testament, they had this monotheistic God. But then Piso basically does an exorcism and turns the monotheistic God into this trinity of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. But then there's this residue of Satan that's also present there. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic. Piso is a powerful magician. Very evil, absolutely. The Gospels are basically a mockery, filled with dirty and disgusting jokes and mockeries and epithets and insults to the Jews. Hardly a word said against the Romans, and it's pretty much stacked with double, triple, quadruple meanings, and also jokes, insults, and just parodies, but also a lot of really deep programming, psychological warfare. And I'm sure the Quran was the same, but let's keep going. The Quran also mentions Iblis, a genie whom the Quran says was rebellious because he refused to worship Adam. The name Iblis may be a rearranged and changed form of the final product of Diabolos, final portion of Diabolos. Diabolos was the original title or name which Piso had given Satan. More likely, Iblis was a secret allusion to Ebla, an ancient city-state in Syria, which had been buried for many centuries. And if so, this indicates how knowledgeable the Quraysh, which is Muhammad's tribe, so-called Muhammad's tribe, were about the history of the Middle East. The Piso's further writings, which is the next volume in this saga that he writes later, which we may cover a little bit of this as that a little bit of that as well, contains a chapter explaining how Piso went back and historicized Satan in his Book of Enoch. Now, the Book of Enoch is one of the Apocrypha, so this is an Old Testament book. Piso actually did go back and kind of edit a lot of the Old Testament books. Even though he didn't know Hebrew, a lot of his family members did, and he had so much power that he basically forced the people, the Jews that were living at Gophna, I believe, they established a kind of a Jewish university there as kind of a concession of the war, and also more psychological operations with Johanan ben Zakkai. And he forced some not significant, I mean significant, but not much editing, just kind of a word twist here or there, writing in somebody into history, like so that a prophet mentions him in one sentence or something like that. And so he says, Piso went back and historicized Satan in his book of Enoch, 1 Enoch, which he started about the year 100. He intended that book as a foundation for his having inserted him in the Gospels, all in addition to having historicized Satan originally in the book of Job before the year 100. So he says that the reference to Satan in the book of Job also was put in by Piso. I'm not familiar with exactly which one that is. There's only a handful of references to Satan in the Old Testament, though. So at least one of them was put in here by Piso. The sixth fictional Pisonian character in the Quran was Gabriel, the archangel. Piso had him appear to Mary to announce she would give birth to the Messiah. Piso also sent Gabriel in Daniel chapter 9 to tell Daniel the computation of when the Savior would arrive. Gabriel was made similarly important in the Quran. In chapter 2, it says, it was Gabriel who, by permission of Allah, gave the Quran to Muhammad. And this scholar named Hitti says it was Gabriel who had given the black stone of Al-Kaaba to Ishmael and who taught him the ceremonies of the Hajj, or the pilgrimage. So it sounds like Gabriel was playing about the same role in both. And these are definitely roles, and this is a play. Piso wrote these as plays. He wrote himself into the script, usually as Jesus, sometimes as Joseph. He wrote his kids into the scripts as the apostles. His kids eventually took over and wrote for another 40 or 50 years after Piso died, or really just 20 years after Piso died. But then his ancestors after that continued to write. It was the kind of the vocation passed down from generation to generation, to write these fraudulent fictional stories about religion. The seventh fictional Pisonian character in the Quran was Haman. He was created by Piso in his Jewish Antiquities and then in his original Greek book of Esther. Now, he says that Piso wrote, he doesn't say this, the guy named Roman Piso, who claims to be a descendant of Piso, Calpurnius, Arius Calpurnius Piso. Roman Piso, who's still alive, I believe, was a few months ago anyway, says that Piso wrote the book of Esther. Now, Esther is the only book from the Dead Sea Scrolls that, the only book of the Old Testament that is not part of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And it, I believe, is the only book of the Old Testament that's in Greek. I'm not sure about that, though. I know it was, I think it's the last book that was written of the Old Testament. And so if any of them are written in Greek, it would be the book of Esther. But in any case, if it's not that Greek version, then it was in what you call the Septuagint, which was, according to this author, commissioned by Piso. He hired 70 Jews to go to Alexandria and put together a Greek translation of the Old Testament. And it's said that he did that so that he had more source material to work with to create Christianity. Now, scholars, I believe, say that the Septuagint is from a much earlier period, like 200 or 300 BC. So I found that surprising. But he does say that Piso was also Aristotle, who was writing in the 4th century BC, late 4th century, mid to late 4th century BC. Basically, the main idea is that the royals had a monopoly on all scholarship, regardless of whether it was religious or not, and that they wrote everything, and anybody else who somehow learned how to read and write and tried to write something wouldn't be able to get it, reproduced or disseminated. And so when you look at the first century, the only things that really exist from the first century are the works of Josephus. As far as history, as far as the works of Josephus and the Gospels, and then there's some philosophy, there's some Seneca, and there's not a whole lot else. And so you have to wonder, or definitely be suspicious of the Gospels. Like, how did they even get out there? The Romans kept a very tight leash on on their censorship. They didn't allow things to be published unless they had the full support of the Roman censors, the emperors. So the Gospels makes complete sense that they were sponsored. Okay, now we'll go back to Haman here. He intended Haman as a humorous insertion of himself as the Min. That's kind of the name that he's given. I think that's one of the pseudonyms he uses, but that's one that they use in the Talmud to kind of make fun of Piso. The people that wrote the Talmud knew what was going on. And so they inserted Piso and Pliny and some other characters and insinuated, at least, that they wrote the New Testament. Later, Haman was borrowed for the Quran and inserted into chapters 28, 29, and 40, where he was made a colleague of Pharaoh and therefore considered an Egyptian. The 8th and 9th Pisonian fictional characters inserted were among the prophets created by Piso in books which he commissioned in Greek and then forced into the Hebrew Bible in Hebrew translation. He had done the same with the story of Haman in Esther. These were the books containing the stories of Jonah and of Job. Job appears in chapters 21 and 38 of the Quran. The similar name Jove was another title of the Roman god Jupiter. Jonas, or Jonah, as he is also called in the Quran, is especially respected in the Quran. He has his own chapter 10, named after him. He is mentioned there and in 3 other chapters. Piso had created him and in his story as the prophecy of Jesus similarly returning from the tomb after 3 days.